No ship appeared on the scanners. No hyperspace signature registered. Yet something fell from the void between stars, leaving only questions and the echo of impossible technology in its wake. The USS Enterprise-D shuddered as the last threads of the anomaly released her running lights flickering, back to steady blue-white as the bridge crew caught their collective breath. Captain Jean-Luc Picard rose from his chair, smoothing his uniform with a single sharp tug, and fixed his gaze on the view screen, where there should have been the familiar dark of open space, or perhaps the swirl of the subspace rupture that had swallowed them whole moments before. There was instead a planet, a vast, glittering world wrapped entirely in city spires of gold and durasteel, climbing out of a haze of air traffic, a sprawl so total that no green, no blue, no bare stone broke its surface. Data, Picard said quietly, report. Captain, sensors do not recognize this stellar configuration. We are no longer within Federation-charted space, nor, I believe, within known space at all. Preliminary spectral analysis suggests we are not in our galaxy of origin. On the observation deck 1 level below, Sue Thomas felt the ship's shudder differently than most of the crew. She'd felt it in her feet, in the deck plates, in the sudden lurch of her stomach, because for Sue, who had lost her hearing to childhood illness years before joining the Bureau, sound was never her first alarm system. Her eyes were, and her eyes had just caught something no announcement system could have told her. The sheer, wide-eyed panic on the face of Ensign Tvora as she gripped a support rail, mouthing a curse in a language Sue didn't recognize but understood perfectly. Beside her, Levi, a golden retriever with soulful brown eyes and a small vest marked FBI hearing dog, pressed his body against her leg, a low whine vibrating through his chest that Sue felt more than heard. He was alert, not afraid exactly, alert in the specific way he got when something was wrong in a room, the way he'd once alerted her to a suspect's concealed weapon 3 full seconds before anyone else in the room had noticed. A hand drift toward a jacket. Report, she signed to Jack Hudson, standing a few feet away, his own footing none too steady. I don't have one to give you, Jack said aloud, forgetting for a half-second that she couldn't hear him, then catching himself and signing the same words with the ease of long practice. For years of partnership had made him fluent enough. Ship rerouted us here for a joint liaison briefing. Bureau doesn't usually get a Starfleet tour. Guess we're getting more than we bargained for. Bobby Manning arrived a moment later at a jog, Miles and Lucy close behind, Tara Williams bringing up the rear with the calm, watchful expression of someone who'd already clocked every exit on the deck out of old habit. They'd all been aboard for the same reason, an experimental Starfleet Bureau exchange program testing whether 24th century investigative technology could benefit terrestrial law enforcement and vice versa. None of them had expected the experiment to end with the ship being yanked sideways, out of its own reality. Where are we? Lucy asked, staring at the view screen through the observation window, at the endless city planet turning below them. That, came Picard's voice over the comm, summoning all liaison personnel to the bridge, is precisely what we intend to find out. By the time Sue's team reached the bridge, Data had already confirmed the impossible. The planet was called Coruscant, according to intercepted comm chatter, and the political entity broadcasting from its surface identified itself as the Galactic Republic. No such polity existed in any Federation database. No such species catalog matched what their sensors were reading in the planet's teeming population. They were not simply lost. They were elsewhere, a phrase Data delivered with the same flat precision he might use to report a hull breach. Picard turned to the away team assembling before him. Sue, sharp-eyed and steady despite the disorientation plain on every other face. Jack, already running diagnostic calculations in his head out of old habit. Levi, sitting at perfect attention, by Sue's side as though the strange new galaxy were simply another crime, seemed to be assessed. Agent Thomas, Picard said, your Bureau's instincts are, I suspect, about to become considerably more relevant than any of us anticipated. We've been invited, or rather, summoned, to Coruscant's surface. The local authority, something called the Jedi Order, has requested to meet with us directly. Jedi, Sue signed back, reading Picard's lips as much as the ship's automated captioning display flickering beside the view screen. Sounds religious. Sounds, Picard said with the faintest, dry twitch of a smile. Like something we'd best approach with open minds and closed assumptions. Levi's ears pricked forward. Something out there, past the golden haze of Coruscant's skyline, past the pinprick lights of 10,000 transports weaving between towers. Something had already caught his attention, the way it always did just before. Sue found the piece of a case that didn't fit the story everyone else believed. She didn't know yet what she was looking for. She only knew, with the same quiet certainty that had cracked a dozen cases the Bureau's best profilers had missed, that something on this strange, shining planet was lying. And she intended to find out what. The shuttle descent through Coruscant's atmosphere was, by Jack Hudson's estimation, the single strangest ride of his career, and he'd once been in a helicopter chase over Chicago during a hailstorm. Traffic lanes stacked 10 deep stretched in every direction. Transports weaving between spires with a precision that suggested either very good pilots or very forgiving traffic laws. Neither explanation comforted him. Sue watched it all with her forehead nearly pressed to the viewport, cataloging details the way she'd been trained to since her first week at the Bureau. Advertisements scrolled past in a dozen scripts she didn't recognize. Beings of species she'd never imagined moved through skywalks and platforms, reptilian, insectoid, human-adjacent, and things she had no category for at all. Levi sat calmly at her feet, but his nose worked constantly, drawing in air thick with 1,000 new scents. Engine exhaust, an unfamiliar spice, and something floral drifting up from garden terraces far below. They landed on a platform outside a colossal ziggurat of pale stone, the Jedi Temple. According to the Republic liaison officer who'd met their shuttle at the upper atmosphere checkpoint, a young man in simple robes, brown-haired and solemn beyond his years, introduced himself as Obi-Wan Kenobi, apprentice to Master Qui-Gon Jinn. He moved with an economy of motion that reminded Sue, oddly, of the Bureau's best tactical instructors, someone whose stillness was a kind of readiness. "The Council has been expecting you," Obi-Wan said, "since your vessel's arrival disturbed the Force itself." Master Yoda felt the ripple 3 systems away. "The Force," Picard repeated, in the tone of a man filing away a term for later cross-examination. "You'll understand soon enough, Captain," Obi-Wan said, and led them inside. The council chamber was a wide, window-ringed room high in the temple spire, its walls glass from floor to ceiling, Coruscant's skyline glittering beyond. A dozen figures sat in a loose circle of chairs, beings of startling variety. Sue noted, aliens and humans both, all watching the newcomers, with expressions ranging from open curiosity to guarded suspicion. At the center of the circle, small and green and ancient beyond any obvious measure, sat a being who could only be the one they called Master Yoda. "Strange, this is," Yoda said, his voice a soft rasp that carried further than it should have. "Torn from your own galaxy, you say?" "Felt it. We did. A wound in the Force, sudden and sharp. Wound, or warning, this arrival may be." Sue caught the words through a combination of translator captioning on the small device the Enterprise engineering team had rigged for her, and careful attention to Yoda's mouth, an old habit that served her just as well across languages as within them. She noted, too, the way several council members' eyes lingered not on Picard, who spoke, but on her and on Levi, sitting statue still at her side. "Sense something in the girl, do I?" said a dark-skinned man with a shaved head, whom Obi-Wan had introduced as Master Mace Windu. Though his eyes were not on Sue, they were on Levi. The animal, alert, unusually so. "Trained, this creature is, but trained for what?" "He's a hearing dog," Sue signed, and Jack translated aloud without being asked. "He alerts me to sounds I can't hear, but he also alerts me to things that don't add up. People who are lying, people who mean harm. He's better at it than most polygraphs I've used." A ripple went through the council at that, not dismissive, Sue noted, but genuinely curious. Several members exchanged glances she couldn't fully read yet, though she suspected, given time, she would learn to. "The Force flows through all living things," said a tall, elegant council member with pale skin and dark hair, introduced as Master Ki-Adi Mundi. "Perhaps this creature senses its currents in some crude way." It would not be the first time a bond between master and companion opened. Doors the Force alone could not. With respect, Picard interjected, my liaison officer's abilities are not mystical. They are the product of rigorous federal training and remarkable personal discipline. I would ask the Council not to mistake competence for coincidence. Yoda's ancient eyes settled on Picard for a long moment. Then on Sue. Competence, I do not doubt. But dismiss coincidence, a wise being does not. Either. He turned to Sue directly, his gaze surprisingly gentle. Feel something already, do you, young one? Since setting foot upon Coruscant. Sue considered the question honestly before answering, the way she always did on a case, resisting the urge to fill silence with a guess. I don't know yet, she signed. But something's off. I've read 1,000 rooms full of people telling the truth and people telling lies. And I know what it looks like when everyone in a room is performing calm. This whole planet feels like it's performing calm. The silence that followed was different from the polite silence before it. Mace Windu's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Obi-Wan glanced toward his master, Kagan, who stood near the window, arms folded, saying nothing, though Sue noted the faint furrow of his brow. A man turning over an uncomfortable thought. Master Kagan departs soon, Yoda said, breaking the silence. For Naboo. Trade disputes, the Senate reports. Simple matter, it should be. Something in the phrase it should be caught in Sue's mind like a snagged thread. She'd built a career on phrases like that, the small verbal hedges people used when they suspected, on some level, that a situation was not as simple as they were pretending. Levi's head lifted, ears forward, toward the wide chamber windows and the Senate spires glimmering in the middle distance, as if he too had heard something the rest of the room had missed. The Republic Senate building rose from Coruscant's skyline, like a great flattened dome, its interior a cavernous bowl of floating platforms, each one home to a delegation from some distant world, all angled toward a central rostrum where debates Sue couldn't yet follow played out in overlapping, urgent voices. She hadn't been invited here for the politics. She'd been invited because Chancellor Valorum's office, alerted by the Jedi Council to the arrival of visitors of unprecedented origin, wanted a diplomatic audience of its own, and because, as Picard had dryly noted before they departed the temple, everyone in this galaxy seemed to want to look at the woman who'd made Master Mace Windu go quiet. Sue rode up in a private turbolift flanked by Jack and Tara, with Levi pressed against her leg in the too fast, too open lift the way he pressed against her in every unfamiliar elevator back home. The lift's transparent wall gave her a dizzying view of the Senate, rotunda falling away below, delegations murmuring in 100 languages she couldn't hear, though she watched their mouths, their hands, their postures with the same reflexive attention she gave every crowd. The office they were shown into belonged, according to the aide who greeted them, to Senator Palpatine of Naboo, offered, the aide explained, as a comfortable waiting room before their audience with the Chancellor, since Senator Palpatine had, personally requested, the honor of meeting the visitors first. He was already there when they entered, mid-50s by human reckoning. Sue guessed, silver at the temples, dressed in rich but understated robes, his face arranged in an expression of warm, unhurried welcome. He rose from behind a broad desk and crossed the room with both hands extended, first to Picard, then, with what struck Sue as a beat too much deliberate care, to her. Agent Thomas, I confess I petitioned rather shamelessly for this meeting. Visitors from beyond the galaxy's edge. One does not receive such an opportunity twice in a lifetime. His voice was cultured, gentle, faintly amused at his own eagerness. Sue read his lips as much from habit as necessity, and found nothing there that didn't match his tone. That, in itself, was almost too perfect. Senator, she signed, Jack translating aloud beside her. Thank you for the welcome. I understand you have a remarkable companion, Palpatine said, his gaze dropping to Levi with what appeared to be genuine warmth, a small, indulgent smile, the kind offered to any well-behaved animal. May I? He crouched, slowly, non-threateningly, extending a hand for Levi to sniff. Exactly as any well-mannered stranger should. Levi did not move to sniff it. He went rigid. A low growl built in his chest, so unlike him that Sue felt it as a physical jolt before she consciously registered what was happening. Levi, who had greeted armed suspects with more equanimity than this, who had never once in 4 years of partnership growled at a stranger without cause, was staring at Palpatine's outstretched hand as though it were a weapon, leveled at his handler. Levi, Sue signed sharply. The correction automatic. Though even as she gave it she was watching the senator's face for the flicker of reaction any normal person would show: surprise, mild offense, a nervous laugh. Palpatine's expression did none of those things. It simply smoothed, instantly, into indulgent understanding. The recovery so seamless. Sue nearly missed that there had been anything to recover from it all. New surroundings, he said easily, straightening. Understandable that he'd be unsettled. A galaxy's worth of new sensations must be overwhelming for such a sensitive creature. He doesn't usually react like that. Sue signed, watching him carefully. Then perhaps, Palpatine said, folding his hands before him, his smile never dimming. He senses something even I am not aware of. Animals are said to be attuned to things we civilized folk have trained ourselves to ignore. It was, Sue thought, a perfectly reasonable thing to say. It was also, she noted with the same instinct, that had once cracked a case built entirely on someone's insistence on being perfectly reasonable. Exactly the kind of line a person used when they wanted a strange reaction explained away quickly, and without further examination. She said nothing further about it. Instead, she watched him field Picard's questions about Republic governance with easy, practiced charm, a public servant patiently explaining democracy's slow gears, the deadlock of a thousand-world Senate, the frustration of a system too large to move quickly even in crisis. He spoke of Naboo's trade dispute with something that sounded, to Jack's ear, like weary concern, and to Sue's eye, like a man reciting a script he'd rehearsed until it no longer felt like performance at all. It was only as they were leaving, Levi still tense at her side, that Sue caught the smallest thing, a flicker, gone almost before it registered. When Palpatine turned to watch them go, not in his face. His face remained perfectly composed. It was in the half-second delay before that composure settled into place. A fraction of hesitation Sue had learned, over a decade of interrogations, to associate with only one thing, a man recalculating, in real time, exactly how much he'd allowed a stranger to see. Something wrong. Jack signed, once they were back in the turbolift, the senator's office falling away above them. I don't know yet, Sue signed back, watching Levi, who still hadn't fully settled, his eyes fixed on the office door even as it vanished from view. But whatever that was, Levi's never been wrong about it before. And neither, usually, am I. Back aboard the Enterprise-D, Sue called what Jack half-jokingly termed a war room briefing in one of the ship's smaller conference lounges. Data present at her request, along with Bobby, Miles, and Lucy, all of them still adjusting to gravity that felt subtly wrong in starlight, that came from unfamiliar constellations. I want to be clear, Sue signed, Jack interpreting aloud for the benefit of Data and the rest of the room, that I don't have evidence of anything yet. What I have is a reaction from a trained animal that's never once been wrong, and a man who recovered from that reaction about 2 seconds too smoothly. In my experience, Data said, folding his hands with characteristic precision, canine behavioral responses of the kind you describe correlate strongly with phenomenal or subsonic cues undetectable to human senses. If Levi's alert was genuine, it suggests Senator Palpatine's physiological state does not match his outward emotional presentation. This is consistent with concealment, deception, or Data paused, running some internal calculation Sue couldn't see, or a condition outside normal human parameters entirely. That's a very polite way of saying he might not be entirely human, Bobby said. I did not say that, Data replied. I said it was a possibility worth investigating. Sue allowed herself the faintest smile. Data reminded her, in some ways, of the best forensic analysts she'd worked with back home, precise to the point of pedantry, but never willing to let precision substitute for genuine inquiry. Then let's investigate it the way the Bureau would, she signed. Not with feelings. With a paper trail. It took the rest of that day, and most of the next. But between Data's access to Republic public record networks, surprisingly porous, for a civilization that prized itself on bureaucratic transparency, and Jack and Bobby's old bureau, instincts for financial forensics, A picture began to take shape that no one in the room much liked. Senator Palpatine's voting record, Data reported, projecting a holographic timeline above the conference table, shows a consistent pattern over the past decade. He has repeatedly supported legislative measures that increase Senate gridlock and bureaucratic delay, measures that, on their surface, appear designed to protect smaller systems from majority overreach. However, cross-referenced against Trade Committee assignments, I have identified 14 instances in which this gridlock directly benefited Trade Federation interests during disputes involving Naboo, Malastare, and 3 other systems. So he's in the Federation's pocket, Lucy said. That would be the simpler explanation, Data said. But there is a complication. Several of the delayed measures would also have benefited rival interests to the Trade Federation had they passed on a different timeline. The pattern is not consistent with loyalty to any single faction. It is consistent with someone engineering instability itself, regardless of who profits from any individual measure, provided the instability continues. The room went quiet at that. Sue had worked organized crime cases before, had learned to recognize the signature of someone playing multiple sides against each other for reasons that had nothing to do with any one side winning. This felt like that. Worse than that, in some ways, this felt like watching a fire slowly, deliberately fed, one carefully placed log at a time, by someone standing close enough to warm his hands. There's more, Bobby said, sliding a data pad across the table, populated with figures Data had helped him extract from Republic banking records. Free shell accounts, registered on Naboo, but routed through Coruscant intermediary firms, moving credits that eventually land through 6 different cutouts in accounts connected to the Trade Federation's blockade fleet currently sitting in Naboo's orbit. Blockade fleet, Sue signed, and felt Levi's ears perk at the tension suddenly thick in the room. Master Qui-Gon's mission, Data confirmed. He departs within the day, dispatched by the Chancellor to negotiate an end to that very blockade. And Palpatine's the one who's been quietly funding the ships enforcing it, Jack said grimly. I would characterize the evidence as strongly suggestive. Not conclusive, Data said. The transactions could theoretically originate from another party using the Senator's known intermediaries as cover. However, I consider this explanation statistically improbable given the pattern's consistency over time. Sue sat back, watching the hologram's tangled financial threads glow above the table, a shape she recognized instinctively, the shape of a conspiracy built patiently enough that anyone looking at any single piece would see nothing but bureaucratic noise. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of case the Bureau lived for and dreaded in equal measure. The kind where the evidence was damning and utterly useless, until someone with authority was willing to look at all of it at once. We need to take this to the Council, she signed, before Qui-Gon leaves for Naboo. If he walks into that blockade blind, and the man who funded it is sitting in a Senate office 3 kilometers from here. They already dismissed your instincts once, Jack pointed out. A force blind spot, Yoda called it. What makes you think financial records will move them any faster than a growling dog did? Sue looked down at Levi, who met her eyes with the same steady attention he gave her in every interview room, every stakeout, every moment she'd needed him most. Because, she signed, this time I'm not asking them to trust my instincts. I'm asking them to read the file. And in my experience, Jack, people can argue with feelings. It's a lot harder to argue with a paper trail. The council chamber felt different the second time, less curious, more watchful, as though word had spread through the temple that the strange visitors had not simply arrived and marveled at the galaxy, but had begun asking questions the Order itself had never thought to ask. Yoda sat in his customary place, flanked by Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and the rest, while Qui-Gon Jinn stood near the window, travel cloak already draped over one arm, clearly moments from departure. Little time we have, Yoda said, not unkindly, as Sue's team filed in. Master Qui-Gon's transport awaits. Say what you have come to say, quickly you must. Data projected the financial hologram at the center of the chamber without preamble, the tangled web of shell accounts, the 14 instances of engineered gridlock, the 6 cutout chain leading from a Naboo senatorial office to the very blockade fleet. Kagan was being sent to negotiate away. The silence that followed was not the polite, considering silence of their first visit. It was heavier. You accuse Senator Palpatine, Mace Windu said slowly, of funding the blockade he claims to oppose. We're not accusing, Sue signed, Jack interpreting. We're presenting evidence. There's a difference, and in my line of work, it's an important one. What you do with it is your decision. But someone is about to fly into a war zone believing the man behind him is an ally, when every record we can find says otherwise. Kagan had gone very still by the window, his earlier furrowed brow now something sharper, not disbelief. Sue noted, but the particular stillness of a man, reassessing something he'd already half suspected and hoped he was wrong about. The Chancellor speaks well of Palpatine, he said quietly, as does the Senate. As I confess, do I? He has always struck me as a reasonable voice amid Coruscant's noise. Reasonable, Sue signed, is exactly the problem. In my experience, the most dangerous people I've ever investigated were never the ones who seemed unreasonable. They were the ones everyone agreed were perfectly calm, perfectly reasonable, perfectly trustworthy, right up until the moment the evidence said otherwise. Yoda's ancient eyes had not left the hologram since Data first projected it, his expression unreadable even to Sue's practiced reading. Troubling, this is, he said at last. Yet troubling, too, is what it does not show. Feel no darkness in Palpatine, do I? Nor does any council member present. If deception this deep there were, sense it, the Force should. With respect, Master Yoda, Picard said. You to feel anything. She is asking you to consider that your Force, remarkable as it clearly is, may have a blind spot precisely where this individual is concerned. Every intelligence service in the Federation's history has, at some point, missed a threat specifically, because that threat understood how to appear invisible to whatever detection method was in use. It is not evidence against the threat's existence. It is, if anything, evidence of how well disguised it might be. Windu's jaw tightened again. The same reaction Sue had noted at their first meeting, not defensiveness. She realized now, watching him more carefully, but the particular discomfort of a disciplined man being asked to seriously entertain the one possibility his training told him was nearly impossible. The Sith are extinct, he said, more to himself than to the room. Have been, for 1,000 years. Extinct, Sue signed, or just very good at appearing extinct. I've worked cases where entire criminal organizations were declared, dismantled by agencies with a lot more resources than yours, only to resurface a decade later, because everyone stopped looking. In the one place no one thought to check. Kagan crossed the chamber slowly, coming to stand before the hologram, studying the 6 cutout chain with the focus of a man who had, Sue suspected, spent a long career learning to trust evidence over comfortable assumption. If this is accurate, he said quietly, then I depart tomorrow for a blockade funded, at least in part, by the very Senate that claims to oppose it. That is not a detail I can simply set aside. Then set it aside you will not, Yoda said. Something resigned entering his voice, but rushed to conclusions. Neither should we. Investigate further, the Council will. Depart as planned, Master Kagan must. Naboo's need is immediate, whatever lies beneath it. But watch, now we shall. Palpatine, and all who move around him. It was not the sweeping validation Sue might have hoped for, but it was, she recognized, the same grudging first crack in institutional certainty she'd seen 100 times before. In her own bureau's history, the moment a room full of experts stopped defending what they believed and started, however reluctantly, checking whether it was true. As the meeting broke, Kagan paused beside Sue on his way to the door, his expression thoughtful. Your companion sensed something none of us did, he said, nodding toward Levi. That troubles me more than any ledger, Agent Thomas. The Force did not warn me. Your dog did. Maybe, Sue signed, the Force isn't the only thing worth listening to. Kagan studied her a moment longer, then inclined his head, not quite agreement, but not dismissal either, before turning to gather his things for Naboo. With Qui-Gon's departure for Naboo underway and the Council's investigation moving at what Sue privately considered a glacial, deliberative pace, she made the call that every good investigator eventually makes. Official channels would only take them so far. If Palpatine's network ran through legitimate Senate bureaucracy on the surface, the actual mechanics of moving credits through six cutouts undetected would have required people who specialized in exactly that kind of invisibility. And those people did not sit on the Jedi Council. Coruscant's underlevels, Obi-Wan explained. When Sue asked him directly for a guide who wouldn't blink at where they needed to go. He'd stayed behind while his master traveled to Naboo, ostensibly to assist the Council's own quiet inquiry, though. Sue suspected he'd simply been unable to let the matter drop any more than she could. Layers upon layers beneath the surface levels you've seen. Different rules apply there. Different loyalties. Sounds familiar, Bobby muttered. Every city's got a version of that. Their guide down was a Twi'lek information broker named Silkestrin, arranged through a contact of Obi-Wan's that he described, with visible reluctance, as someone I have used before, and trusted exactly as far as her price allowed. Sil operated out of a cantina wedged into the underside of a transit platform, 3 levels down from where sunlight, real or artificial, ever reached. Her clientele a mix of smugglers, bounty hunters, and Senate aides too careful to be seen making inquiries through official channels. FBI, Sil said, turning the unfamiliar acronym over with evident amusement once. Jack had explained who they were, her twin Leku shifting with what Sue read as genuine curiosity rather than performance. Never heard of it, but I know badge energy when I see it. You're cops. Coruscant's had its share of those looking for me over the years. We're not here to arrest anyone. Sue signed, Jack translating. We're here because someone's been laundering blockade funding through 6 shell layers, and we need to know who built the pipeline. Sil's amusement sharpened into something more careful. That's an expensive question to ask down here. We can pay, Picard said, though the offer visibly troubled him. A Starfleet captain negotiating with a criminal information network was not, Sue gathered, standard procedure in his world any more than it was in hers. Credits are cheap, Sil said, waving a hand. Information like this, though, the kind that names names near the top of the Republic, that's not the kind of thing you buy with credits alone. That's the kind of thing that gets the seller killed if the wrong person hears about the sale. She studied Sue for a long moment. Then Levi, who sat calmly at Sue's side, unbothered by the dim, smoke-hazed cantina in a way that told Sue there was nothing dangerous in the room, whatever else might be true of it. But I'll tell you this for free, cop, because it's good business to have off-worlders owe me a favor. The account structure you're describing isn't Trade Federation work. Too clean. The feds are thugs with good lawyers. They leave fingerprints. This is someone who's been doing this for a very long time, moving money so quietly that half of Coruscant's biggest players don't even know they're being used. Do you have a name? Sue signed. I have a rumor, Sil said. A name whispered by exactly one broker I trust, who heard it from someone who died 2 days after saying it aloud. A moniker, not a name, used only in the deepest transaction ledgers, the ones even Republic intelligence has never cracked. They call him the Sithari in some old texts. In newer circles, just the hidden hand. The cantina noise seemed to recede for a moment as Sue absorbed that. Sith, not extinct after all. Whatever the Jedi Council believed, or at least, not gone in whatever meaning the term held now. Is there a face behind that name? Jack asked. A location? Anything. If there were, Sil said, I'd charge you considerably more than a favor for it. What I can tell you is this, the ledgers. I've glimpsed route final authorization through a Coruscant office with Senate-level security clearance. Not Trade Federation. Not military. Political. She let that sit a moment, watching their faces. You want my honest read, cop to cop? Whoever's behind the hidden hand isn't hiding from the Senate. He's hiding inside it. Levi shifted against Sue's leg, a small, deliberate motion she'd learned over years to read as recognition, not alarm, not aggression, but the particular stillness he showed when a piece of a puzzle he already sensed was finally being named aloud by someone else. It was, Sue thought, exactly the confirmation she hadn't realized she needed. Not proof. Not yet, but the second independent thread, political, criminal, entirely separate from the Council's own investigation, pointing toward the same shadowed shape. Thank you, Sue signed to. Sil, you may have just made this a much bigger case than a trade dispute. Careful, cop, Sil said, with a thin, knowing smile as they rose to leave. Bigger cases get bigger enemies. And down here, we've all heard what happens to people who go looking for the hidden hand and find him. Picard called it, in the privacy of his ready room. The question every officer eventually faces and hopes never to. Sue sat across from him. Levi curled at her feet, while Data stood by the viewport. Coruscant's night skyline glittering below like a field of captured stars. The Prime Directive, Picard said, exists for good reason, Agent Thomas. Starfleet does not interfere in the internal affairs of civilizations we encounter. Not because we lack the power to, but because history has taught us, repeatedly and at great cost, that even well-intentioned interference tends to cause harm no one anticipated. With respect, Captain, Sue signed. This isn't a pre-warp civilization stumbling toward its own future. This is a political system already under attack by someone using its own laws as camouflage. We're not talking about interfering with their development. We're talking about whether we say something when we watch a man walk into a trap. I'm aware of the distinction, Picard said. And Sue could see, in the set of his jaw, that he'd already argued both sides of this with himself, long before she'd entered the room. But consider the precedent. If we act unilaterally on behalf of one faction in a political crisis not our own, what claim would we have to neutrality afterward? What door would that open? The next time we encounter a civilization in crisis and believe we know better than they do how to resolve it. There's a difference, Data offered, between correcting a civilization's chosen path and providing verified factual information that allows that civilization to correct its own path using its own institutions. The Council, not we, would decide what to do with the evidence. We are not proposing to depose Senator Palpatine, Captain. We are proposing to ensure the Jedi Council possesses accurate information rather than an incomplete picture shaped by a blind spot in their own perceptive abilities. Picard considered that for a long moment, turning it over with the same care Sue had watched him give every decision since their arrival. And if providing that information changes the outcome of events that were always meant to unfold a particular way, we do not know this galaxy's history, Data. We do not know what depends on what. No, Sue signed, we don't. But I'll tell you what I do know, Captain, because it's the same thing. I tell every rookie agent who asks me whether it's really their job to get involved. I've spent my career watching people who could have said something choose silence instead, because they weren't sure it was their place, or they worried about setting a precedent, or they didn't want to be the one who changed how a case turned out. And every single time, the people who paid for that silence weren't the agents who stayed neutral. They were the victims nobody warned. This is not merely a case, Agent Thomas, Picard said, though there was less certainty in it now than there had been a moment before. This is an entire civilization's political trajectory. Then it matters more, not less, Sue signed. Captain, I'm not asking Starfleet to fight anyone's war. I'm asking whether the Federation's principles include standing by while a man who is already, provably, manipulating an entire democracy walks free because acting feels like too large a step. Because in my experience, that's not neutrality. That's just a more comfortable name for it. The ready room was quiet for a long moment. Below, Coruscant continued its endless, glittering churn, oblivious to the debate playing out 400 kilometers above its surface. There is another consideration, Captain, Data said quietly. We did not choose to arrive in this galaxy. We did not choose to encounter this conspiracy, but we have encountered it and possess evidence relevant to preventing significant harm. The Prime Directive was conceived to prevent Starfleet from imposing its own values onto developing civilizations. It was not conceived to require silence in the face of an active crime already unfolding within a fully developed civilization's own borders. One that has, moreover, directly solicited our counsel. Picard exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing by degrees as the argument settled into something he could finally act on rather than merely weigh. You argue well, both of you, he said. Very well. He rose, moving to the viewport beside Data, studying the city planet below with the particular stillness of a man arriving at last at a decision. We will not seize control of this situation, Agent Thomas. We will not fight this galaxy's battles for it. But we will not withhold the truth from those capable of acting on it. Either the Council receives everything we know, fully, and without further delay. That's all I was asking for, Captain, Sue signed. I rather suspect, Picard said, with the ghost of a wry smile, that you were asking for considerably more than that, Agent Thomas. You were simply too diplomatic to say so outright. Levi's tail thumped once against the ready room floor. The closest thing to agreement he had to offer. The full disclosure session took place not in the council chamber, but in a smaller, more secure meeting room deep within the temple. At Mace Windu's insistence, fewer ears. Should this go where I suspect it will? He'd said grimly upon hearing Silkestran's account of the hidden hand relayed through Sue's careful signing. Present were Yoda, Windu, Kiadimundi, Obi-Wan, Picard, Data, and Sue's full team, Levi included. The dog settling immediately into the watchful stillness he adopted. Whenever a room's tension climbed toward something dangerous, Data laid out the complete picture with methodical precision. The 14 instances of engineered gridlock, the 6 cut-out financial chain, the underworld's own whispered name for whoever sat at the center of it all, the hidden hand, a moniker that matched, disturbingly, older Jedi archive references Obi-Wan had quietly cross-checked overnight. References to a Sith tradition of operating always through apprentice and shadow, never revealing the master's true face until the moment of triumph. The rule of two, Kiadimundi said quietly, once Data had finished. A master and an apprentice. If this hidden hand is real, if the Sith have endured, hidden for a millennium, then somewhere in this chain there exists not one conspirator, but two. Which raises the question, Windu said, of which role Senator Palpatine occupies, master or apprentice. Does it matter? Bobby asked. Either way, he's dirty. It matters enormously, Yoda said, his voice heavier than Sue had yet heard it. If apprentice only, then somewhere, unseen, a master waits still. Removed, one threat may be replaced. Just as quickly, that threat could become by a hand we have not yet perceived at all. Sue absorbed that with the particular unease of an investigator realizing a case she'd assumed had one target might, in fact, have an entire hierarchy above it. It was, she thought, exactly the mistake the Bureau trained agents hardest against. Closing a case on the first suspect who fit, without asking who that suspect answered to. Then we don't move on Palpatine directly, she signed. Not yet. If he's the apprentice, taking him down alone just clears the board for whoever's above him to start over clean. This time without anyone watching. We need to know the shape of the whole organization before we move on any part of it. A patient approach, Windu said. Something like grudging. Respect entering his voice for the first time since their first meeting. Not what I would have expected from an off-worlder. Eager to prove her instincts correct. I'm not trying to prove anything, Master Windu, Sue signed. I'm trying to close a case the right way. Closing it the wrong way just means reopening it later, usually after it's gotten worse. It was Yoda who raised the harder question, the one Sue had felt approaching since Syl first spoke the words. Hidden hand in that smoke haze cantina. If Sith this is, he said, then explain, someone must. Why sense him? None of us do. 1,000 years of Jedi teaching, built upon the Force's guidance. Fail us now, should it not? If enemy this significant walks among us unseen. The room went quiet, the question sitting heavier than any of the financial evidence had. Sue considered it carefully before answering, aware that whatever she said next would either open a genuine crack in the Order's confidence or seal it shut entirely. I don't know the Force, she signed. I can't explain why it doesn't see him, but I've worked cases with brilliant detectives. Master Yoda, people with instincts sharper than mine, tools I didn't have. And every single one of them missed something, eventually, because every detection method has a blind spot somewhere. And the smartest criminals learn exactly where that blind spot is and build their whole operation to live inside it. Maybe the Force is real, and maybe it's as reliable as everyone here believes. But if there's one lesson my whole career has taught me, it's this: the moment you believe your method is infallible is exactly the moment something learns to exploit it. Yoda's ears lowered slightly, an expression Sue couldn't fully translate but suspected, from the stillness that followed, was something close to genuine unsettlement, an ancient certainty being examined, for perhaps the first time in centuries, from outside its own frame. Uncomfortable, This truth is, Yoda said finally. But wisdom, sometimes discomfort brings. Consider it, the council will. And more carefully, watch Senator Palpatine. We shall, and all who orbit him, master or apprentice alike. As the meeting broke, Obi-Wan lingered near Sue. His expression troubled in a way that reminded her, oddly, of young agents on their first major case, the specific unease of someone realizing the world was larger and darker than their training had prepared them for. If the Sith have truly endured, he said quietly, unseen for 1,000 years, what else has the Order failed to notice in all that time? That, Sue signed, is usually the exact question that breaks a case wide open. The trap, when it came fast, the way Sue had learned. Over a decade of fieldwork, that cornered predators always struck, not with hesitation, but with sudden, overwhelming violence designed to end the threat before it could finish forming. It began with a priority transmission, intercepted by Data during a routine sensor sweep of Senate communications, a channel Data had quietly continued monitoring since the full disclosure meeting. At Windu's private request, the message was brief. Encrypted in a cipher, Data cracked within minutes. An order, routed through Senator Palpatine's private office, authorizing a Coruscant Guard tactical unit to neutralize the off-world liaison team currently residing aboard the visiting vessel on grounds of suspected espionage against Republic security. They're moving against us directly, Jack said, reading the translation over Data's shoulder. Not against the evidence. Against us. Predictable, Data said, if regrettable. We have become the single point of failure in an otherwise successful concealment. Removing us removes the primary threat to that concealment's continuation. Picard's response was immediate. Red alert. Shields up. Agent Thomas, your team is to remain aboard until we've assessed the scope of this threat. But Sue was already shaking her head, signing rapidly to Jack for translation even as she moved toward the shuttle bay. If they're moving on us, they're moving on the Council too, on anyone who's seen that evidence. Obi-Wan's still at the temple. If Palpatine thinks the game is up, he's not going to leave any thread untied. Data's fingers moved across his console. Agent Thomas is correct. I am detecting a second Coruscant Guard deployment converging on Temple airspace, ostensibly for security consultation, timed to coincide precisely with the unit approaching this vessel. 2 birds, Bobby said grimly. 1 stone. Picard's jaw set. Mr. Data, hold the away team's shuttle in the bay. Sue, if you're determined to warn the Temple, you'll do it with an escort, and you'll do it fast. The shuttle ride down was the fastest and roughest of Sue's life. Levi braced against her legs, his low growl a steady undercurrent beneath the shuttle's straining engines as Data pushed velocities Sue suspected violated several Starfleet safety regulations at once. They reached the Temple's upper platform with barely minutes to spare. Enough time to see, on the horizon, a formation of Coruscant Guard gunships approaching, with a precision that had nothing to do with any routine consultation. Obi-Wan met them at the platform's edge, already moving, his expression grim. Master Windu sensed the disturbance before your warning arrived. The Council is preparing. He didn't finish the sentence. The first gunship opened fire, not on the Temple itself. Sue realized in the chaotic half-second before she threw herself flat. Levi pressed protectively against her. But on the platform, on the shuttle, on the visible evidence of the Enterprise team's presence, as though someone had decided the cleanest solution was simply to erase every witness in a single stroke. What followed was chaos rendered almost balletic by the presence of Jedi reflexes. Obi-Wan's lightsaber a blur of blue light deflecting blaster fire back toward the approaching gunships with lethal precision, while Windu arrived a heartbeat later, his own blade carving through a boarding party of guard troopers who'd fast-roped onto the platform with lethal intent that made their supposed consultation cover a transparent lie. Sue's team, unarmed for anything resembling this kind of firefight, did the only thing they could. Jack and Bobby dragging wounded Temple staff to cover. Tara applying field first aid learned in a very different kind of war zone, while Sue herself, flat against the platform's edge with Levi shielding beneath her arm, watched the pattern of the attack with the same cold clarity she'd once used to read a hostage situation gone wrong. "They're not trying to capture anyone," she shouted to Obi-Wan, though he couldn't hear her, forcing Jack to relay the observation at a shout over the blaster fire. "This isn't an arrest operation. It's an extermination order. Whoever gave this command isn't worried about being caught. They're making sure there's no one left to testify." The battle ended almost as abruptly as it began. Windu and Obi-Wan, reinforced by 3 more council members who arrived at a dead run, finishing what remained of the boarding party within minutes. The surviving gunships peeling away into Coruscant's traffic lanes rather than face 2 lightsabers worth of retribution. In the smoking aftermath, Windu knelt beside a fallen guard trooper, checking for survivors among the attackers with grim efficiency, while Sue finally rose on unsteady legs, Levi shaking against her side but otherwise unhurt. "This," Windu said, rising, his voice tight with a fury Sue suspected he rarely allowed himself to show, "was no rogue unit acting alone. This was sanctioned from the highest levels of Coruscant security." "Which means," Sue signed, still catching her breath, "Palpatine knows we know, and he stopped pretending he cares whether the Council believes us." "Then the time for patience," Windu said, "has ended." The Council convened in full emergency session within the hour. The attack on the temple platform serving as evidence no amount of institutional caution could dismiss any longer. Yoda sat at the center of the circle, his expression graver than Sue had yet seen it, while outside the chamber's tall windows, Coruscant Guard reinforcements, the loyal kind, dispatched by a Senate Security Committee horrified to learn of the unauthorized strike, secured the temple perimeter against any further action. An attack sanctioned from within Republic security itself. Windu reported to the assembled council against a sitting Jedi temple and allied off-world visitors. Whatever doubts remained regarding the evidence Agent Thomas and her team presented, this attack has answered them. No mere trade dispute inspires assassination attempts against witnesses. The question now, Ki-Adi-Mundi said, is what the Council does with that certainty. It was Yoda who answered, his voice heavy but resolute. "Move against Senator Palpatine directly, we cannot. Not yet. Apprentice or master, unclear this remains. And act too soon, we must not. Lest whoever stands above him simply retreat further into shadow. But blind, no longer, will this council be. Watched, Palpatine will be. From this moment forward, every vote, every transaction, every shadow he commands. And shared, this knowledge will be. With allies across the Senate who value the Republic's survival over its comfortable ignorance. It was not the immediate justice Sue might once have hoped for. The bureau instinct in her wanted handcuffs and arraignment, a case closed cleanly. But she'd learned long ago that the largest conspiracies rarely ended in a single arrest. They ended in patient, sustained pressure, applied by people who refused to look away again. Word of the conspiracy reached trusted Senate allies within days, Bail Organa among them, a young senator from Alderaan, whose quiet horror at the revelations suggested he would spend the coming years watching Palpatine's rise with far sharper eyes than he might have otherwise. The Jedi Council, for its part, began, slowly, deliberately, questioning its own certainty about what the Force could and could not perceive, a fracture in 1,000 years of doctrine that would outlast this single case entirely. Qui-Gon Jinn, meanwhile, continued toward Naboo, unaware of how close the danger above him truly ran. The blockade's true financier now known, but the mission itself too urgent, too immediate, to delay for a conspiracy still taking shape. Somewhere ahead of him, on a sandblasted world called Tatooine, a boy he had not yet met was about to change the galaxy in ways no Ledger could have predicted. Aboard the Enterprise-D, preparing at last to search for a way home, Sue Thomas watched Coruscant's lights recede below, Levi resting his head against her knee. She had not solved this case. She had, at best, cracked it open, handed it to people who would spend years finishing what she'd started, in a galaxy she would likely never see again. "Think we made a difference?" Jack asked, settling beside her. Sue considered the question with the same honesty she gave every uncertain outcome. "I think," she signed, "we made it harder for him to hide. That's usually where every good case starts." Levi's tail thumped once, softly, against the deck, the closest thing to the last word he ever needed. "May the Force be with you."